Her slap echoed through the church like thunder. "Whore!" she screamed, right there in front of God, my family, and 100 guests. My veil slipped sideways. My cheek burned. But worse, my own son just sat there, said nothing, did nothing. I looked at him, pleading, and he stared down at his shoes like he didn't even know me. Then I heard the first whisper, inheritance. Chloe had planned this, and she'd won. Cameras flashed, people gasped. I wanted to crumble, but the vows weren't signed. Not yet. I straightened my dress, raised my chin, and made a silent vow of my own. She may have humiliated me, but she had no idea who she just slapped. And when I walked back into that church, I wasn't the bride anymore. I was the reckoning. You won't believe what I did next. My name is Eleanor Caldwell, and I'm 75 years old. Every afternoon I sit in my worn leather armchair, watching. Shadows dance across freshly polished oak floors while my kettle whistles its familiar tune. After Tom passed, I settled into quiet rhythms, bookkeeping by day, knitting circles by night. Then, Charles Henderson, a retired music professor, began joining me for evening concerts at the park. We shared crosswords, gentle walks, and eventually, tender hopes. My son Marcus and his girlfriend Chloe watch our courtship with sharp eyes. Mom's losing. I overheard Marcus tell her, his voice thick with worry about his inheritance. My fingers traced the spine of my accounting ledger, 30 years of pristine records and kept promises. My childhood friend Evelyn, now a retired attorney, remains just a phone call away. The lavender-scented sanctuary of my home holds more weapons than they know. But let me start from the beginning. You know that feeling when time slows down? When every detail burns itself into your memory like a photograph left too long in the sun? That's how it was on my wedding day. The church smelled of Easter lilies, Tom's favorite. I'd specifically requested them, thinking he'd have approved of Charles, of this second chance at happiness. Their perfume hung thick in the air, almost drowning out the familiar scent of old hymnals and wood polish that had filled St. Matthew's for the past 50 years. The organ? Pipes trembled with box air on G-string. Charles and I had chosen it together over tea and lemon cookies one rainy afternoon. Through my veil, I could see him standing at the altar, his silver hair catching the morning light that streamed through the stained glass windows. He looked so handsome in his navy suit, hands clasped patiently in front of him. The sunlight created golden bands across the cream runner, and I remember thinking how fitting it was, like nature itself was laying out wedding rings for my path forward. My grandson Tommy gave me a tiny wave from his pew, making me smile despite my nerves. 3 rows behind him sat Marcus, my only child, his face unreadable as stone. Next to him, Chloe wore a tight green dress that seemed better suited for a cocktail party than a morning wedding. Have you ever noticed how a crowd's energy can shift in an instant? Like storm? Clouds gathering before the first crack of thunder? I was halfway down the aisle, my bouquet of white roses trembling slightly in my hands, when it happened. There was a sudden movement, a blur of green, and before I could process what was happening, Chloe had lunged from her pew. Her hand connected with my cheek with a crack that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Whore!" The word bounced between the stone pillars, multiplying like poison. I staggered, my veil slipping sideways as several guests gasped. Through watering eyes, I looked to Marcus, desperate for him to intervene, to defend his mother. He sat frozen, staring at his shoes as if they held the secrets of the universe. That's when I noticed the phones. Dozens of them, rising like periscopes above the shocked faces of our guests. The soft clicks of camera shutters mixed with whispers and the dying notes of the organ. My cheek burned, but something deeper was burning too, the realization that this moment would live forever in digital infamy. But then, a peculiar clarity cut through my humiliation. We hadn't signed anything yet. The marriage license was still pristine in the sacristy, waiting for our signatures after the ceremony. Legally, nothing was binding. This moment, This very public shame could still be controlled if I acted quickly enough. My heel caught the hem of my dress as I took a step backward. The church had erupted into a low murmur of confusion and scandal. I heard our pastor, Reverend Walsh, trying to restore order. "Please, everyone remain seated." But his voice trailed off as if he'd lost the script for this particular crisis. Who could blame him? In 40 years of ministry, I doubt he'd ever seen a bride get slapped at the altar. The white walls of the church seemed to be closing in, creating a tunnel of faces and flashing phones. My vision narrowed to a single point, the dark wood of the sacristy door. It promised escape, yes, but more importantly, it held the unsigned marriage license that represented my choices: proceed with dignity or retreat with strategy. The roses in my hands shed petals with each trembling breath I took. Someone dropped a hymnal, the thud echoing like a judge's gavel. In that moment, standing there, with my cheek stinging and my veil askew, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about today's ceremony anymore. This was about the story that would be told tomorrow, next week, next year. Reverend Walsh cleared his throat, perhaps ready to try again at restoring order, but then fell silent. The weight of anticipation pressed down on the church like a heavy blanket. Everyone waited to see what the humiliated old bride would do next. Vestry's silence wrapped around me like a thick blanket as the organ sputtered to a stop mid-hymn. My hands found the edge of an ancient wooden table, its surface worn smooth by generations of ministers. Through the heavy door, I could hear the sanctuary's collective breath turn into a rising tide of whispers. You know that moment when your world shifts and suddenly everything familiar feels strange? That's where I was standing. A gentle knock made me jump. "Eleanor?" Charles's voice came through, soft as church music. "Let me help, darling. I can clear everyone out if you'd prefer." My fingers traced the grain of the wood as I steadied myself. Such a dear man, already trying to protect me. The salt of tears surprised me as I pressed my palm against my burning cheek. My reflection in a small wall mirror showed a woman I barely recognized, veil crooked, makeup smeared, dignity hanging by threads. But something in those eyes, my mother's eyes, sparked with familiar steel. I smoothed my dress, straightened my spine, the way my father had taught me to face trouble, and opened the door. The sanctuary had transformed into a theater of uncomfortable poses. Several guests studied their hymnals with suspicious intensity. Others huddled in whispering clusters, with Chloe at the center of the largest group, her green dress like poison. Ivy among the Sunday best. Marcus sat alone now, examining his hands as if they held answers he couldn't quite read. Reverend Walsh met me halfway down the aisle, his kind face creased with concern. "Mrs. Caldwell, the ceremony is paused," I said, making sure my voice carried just far enough. "Not canceled." The ripple of relief and confusion that moved through the pews was almost visible. That's when I caught it. The first whisper from McGee, pew to my right. Inheritance. The word slithered past like a snake in the garden. I'd expected this, but the speed of it still stung. My cousin Martha's stare could have drilled holes through steel, her phone still raised as if documenting evidence. Helen Baker, my neighbor of 20 years, actually flinched when our eyes met. The flashbulbs had mostly stopped, but their ghost images danced in my vision like accusations. Charles appeared, at my elbow, solid and warm. "My car's out back," he murmured, through the side door. His hand barely touched my elbow, but that small gesture of support nearly broke my composure. The side door had always squeaked. I remembered that sound from countless Sunday services, back when Tommy was a toddler who couldn't sit still. Now it announced my retreat like a rusty herald. The spring wind hit me full in the face as we stepped into the churchyard, carrying the scent of lilacs from the memorial garden. How quickly a day could pivot from joy to hazard, from celebration to survival. I turned to Charles, this good man who'd offered me a second chance at happiness. "I need one night," I said, hating the tremor in my voice, "just to think it through." His face showed nothing but understanding, which somehow made it harder. Movement caught my eye. Chloe standing in the church. Doorway, her thumbs flying over her phone screen. Even from here, I could see the satisfaction in her posture. She was writing my story for me, one text at a time, and I knew exactly how it would read. Desperate widow, gold digger, family destroyer. The silver cross atop the church caught the morning sun, throwing shadows across the grass where I'd pictured confetti falling just hours ago. My dress felt heavy now, its crisp fabric creased and sullied by more than just Chloe's handprint, but under the weight of it all, something else was taking root, something that felt remarkably like resolve. You ever notice how silence has textures? That first week after the wedding, that wasn't. I learned them all. There was the cottony hush of my phone, sitting dead as a paperweight on the kitchen counter. The heavy wool of empty chairs at my regular bridge table at the community center. The slick, cold silence of Mary at Thompson's grocery, who'd counted my exact change with a smile for 15 years, but now couldn't seem to find my eyes. I kept expecting something to break through, a concerned call, a neighborly visit, even just a sympathetic nod at the mailbox. But Chloe's version of events had spread faster than autumn wildfire, and it was clear which story people preferred to believe. "Did you hear?" The whispers followed me, like shadows. "Eleanor Caldwell's trying to steal that poor man's money, her own son's inheritance, and after what happened with her first husband's estate, that last bit stopped me cold in the dairy aisle one morning. George's estate? I'd managed every penny of it myself, documented every transaction. But that's the thing about rumors. They don't need facts to grow teeth. Marcus called 3 times that first day, each time his name lit up my screen like an accusation. Each time I let it ring through to voicemail. What could he say that would erase his silence in that church? His girlfriend had struck his mother, called her a whore in God's house, and he'd sat there like a statue. Sometimes silence speaks volumes, doesn't it? 4 days after the incident, Charles showed up at my door. He held a bouquet of pink carnations, my favorites, though I'd only mentioned it once, and his eyes carried more worry than I could bear. "Eleanor," he said, taking my hand as we sat in my living room. The afternoon light caught his wedding band, still new and hopeful on his finger. "We don't need the church. We don't need the guests. The courthouse is open Tuesday mornings. We could just—" My throat tightened. Such a simple solution. Sign the papers, say the words, slip away from all this mess. But something in me rebelled at the thought of skulking into marriage like it was something shameful. "Think about it," Charles pressed gently. "No more whispers, no more scenes. We could be in Florida by Wednesday." That night, after he'd gone, exhaustion settled into my bones like wet cement. I sat at my old roll-top desk, the one George had refinished for our 10th anniversary, and tried to imagine a life lived small, avoiding certain stores, taking different routes to church, moving away from the town where I'd raised my son just to dodge the sideways glances. The lamp cast yellow light across my ledger as I started making notes. Names, dates, account numbers. Every conversation I could remember with Chloe, with Marcus, with the financial advisor. My hand moved steady at first, then slowed as shame crept in like evening fog. The letters blurred. When Charles called around 9, I heard the hope in his voice. "Have you thought about Tuesday?" "I need more time," I whispered, hating how weak it sounded. We both knew what running would mean, that Chloe's lies would calcify into truth, that my reputation would forever carry an asterisk. After hanging up, I pulled my wedding dress from the closet. The white fabric still carried the scent of lilies from the church. With hands that barely shook, I folded it into the preservation box I'd bought weeks ago, smoothing each layer like I was putting away more than just silk and lace. The box slid under my bed with a soft scrape. a white flag of surrender in the darkness. Close to midnight, my phone lit up the room. Unknown number. I stared at it for 3 rings, wondering what fresh humiliation waited on the other end. On the 4th ring, I answered. "Eleanor, it's Evelyn Brunswick." The voice on the line wrapped around me like a warm shawl, bringing back summer afternoons on her father's porch, sharing lemonade and secrets. "I saw what happened at the church. Are you ready to talk about it?" My hand trembled on the receiver. Evelyn had been my closest friend since grade school, before she'd moved away to become the sharpest divorce attorney in 3 counties. I didn't want to bother you with this. Nonsense. Start from the beginning." So I did. The words spilled out like water from a broken dam, the slap, the accusations, Marcus's silence, the whispers that followed. Evelyn listened without interruption, but I could hear her pen scratching notes in the background. "And the ceremony?" she asked when I finished. "Were the papers signed?" "No, we hadn't reached that part yet." "Good." There was steel under her warmth now. "Tell me about Chloe. How long has Marcus been with her?" I described their whirlwind romance, how quickly she'd moved in with him, her comments about Charles's estate. With each detail, Evelyn's questions grew more specific. Had Chloe ever asked to borrow money? Did she show unusual interest in financial matters? Had she made similar accusations against anyone else? "Eleanor," Evelyn said finally, "I need you to listen carefully. Chloe Patterson isn't new to this game. In the past 5 years, she's been named in 3 lawsuits involving elderly men, all wealthy, all suddenly convinced to change their wills. She has unpaid judgments in 2 counties. And there's a pattern of her targeting families during major life events, especially weddings and funerals." Something shifted inside me, like tumblers in a lock, finally clicking into place. The shame that had weighed me down began to lift, replaced by a terrible clarity. "I almost agreed to elope," I whispered. "Charles suggested we slip away to the courthouse. Avoid the scandal." "That's exactly what she wants," Evelyn cut in. "If you run now, her story becomes the only story. But we can fight this, Eleanor. We can prove what she's really doing." The steel in her voice steadied me. "Tell me how." "First, we need documentation. Every financial record you have, bank statements, investment accounts, George's estate papers, any messages from Chloe, even casual ones, names of witnesses who heard her spreading rumors, dates and exact quotes when possible." I glanced at my roll-top desk, thinking of the decades of careful records filed inside. "I keep everything." "Perfect. We'll also need statements from your financial advisor confirming your handling of George's estate. And Eleanor, don't delete any new messages, even the ugly ones. They're evidence now." Standing up, I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the wedding dress box. The fabric inside wasn't just silk and dreams anymore, it was a battle flag. "This won't be a burial shroud," I said, more to myself than Evelyn. "That's my girl. Now what's your next move with Charles?" I took a deep breath. "I need to call him. Tell him no courthouse escape, no hiding. We'll have our wedding, but only after we've cleared my name." "Good. Remember, you're not just fighting for your marriage. You're fighting for every truth." Chloe tried to bury. After hanging up with Evelyn, I dialed Charles. My voice was steady now, certain. "I've made my decision. We're not eloping." "Eleanor, listen to me. I won't start our life together by running from lies. We'll have our wedding, in that church, with those flowers, in front of everyone who matters. But first, we're going to set things right." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you need from me?" "Just trust me, and be ready for some uncomfortable truths about Chloe." As I ended the call, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Mom, we need your final decision about the wedding. This has gone on long enough." I looked at my son's message, then at the wedding dress box open beside me. Yes, it had gone on long enough, just not in the way he thought. My cousin Janet called just after dinner. Eleanor, I thought you should know. Marcus and Chloe are throwing this big party at the country club in 2 weeks. They're announcing their future plans, whatever that means. My hand tightened on the receiver. Future plans? It's all very hush-hush, but they've booked the main ballroom. You know, the one with the crystal chandeliers where we had your 70th? Janet paused. Eleanor, I'm sorry I haven't called since that day at church. I just didn't know what to... It's all right, I said, already reaching for my notepad. Tell me more about this party. After Janet hung up, I called Evelyn. 2 weeks, I told her. That's our deadline. Perfect, she said. A contained time frame and a public venue. Now, grab a pen. We're making a battle plan. Remember those quiet afternoons I used to spend organizing my recipe box, each card sorted by season and occasion? This was nothing like that. For the next hour, Evelyn and I built a different kind of filing system. Each day had its tasks, each task its purpose. First thing tomorrow, Evelyn said, we need statements from your financial advisor and the estate lawyer who handled George's will. Get them notarized. Then we'll pull Chloe's courthouse records. Those lawsuits aren't just rumors anymore. I wrote everything down in my best bookkeeper's hand. Monday, financial statements. Tuesday, courthouse records. Wednesday. Screenshot text messages. The list grew, precise as a church program. What about witnesses? I asked, thinking of my bridge club, the grocery clerk, my neighbors. Document everything. Who heard what, when, and where. Build a timeline. And Eleanor? Record every interaction with Chloe from now on. Your phone has a voice memo function. Learn to use it. I glanced at my ancient flip phone. I might need an upgrade. Charles can help with that, Evelyn said. Speaking of which, we need to keep him involved but protected. Give him specific tasks, picking up documents, making copies. Nothing that puts him in Chloe's direct line of fire. The memory of my almost wedding day flashed back, Charles's face as he knocked on the vestry door, trying to make things right. No, I wouldn't let him become another target. I've written up a script, Evelyn continued. Use it when you're gathering. Statements. Stick to facts, dates, and direct quotes. No emotions, no accusations. We want witnesses, not warriors. I copied her words carefully. I'm documenting recent events for legal purposes. Could you please state what you heard, saw on date? Simple, clean, professional. Opening my desk drawer, I pulled out a stack of manila envelopes. Each one would hold its own category of evidence. Financial records, witness statements, screenshots, voice recordings. I labeled them in clear block letters, then added a second set of labels to the duplicate copies we'd store at Evelyn's office. The kitchen calendar caught my eye, the one still showing my original wedding date. I flipped forward 2 weeks and drew 2 thick circles around the party date. Underneath, I wrote, "I'll evidence," then stared at those words until they burned into my memory. One more thing, Evelyn said. Start. With Martha Jensen. She lives next door, right? She must have heard plenty. I thought of Martha, how she'd turned away at the supermarket last week. But she was also the one who'd watched Marcus grow up, who'd brought casseroles after George died. If anyone knew the truth of who I was, it was Martha. My hands shook slightly as I dialed her number. 1 ring. 2. 3. Just when I thought she wouldn't answer, I heard a soft click. Martha, it's Eleanor Caldwell. A pause, then a careful intake of breath. Yes? I gripped my script, ready to begin. The next morning, I spread my records across the dining room table, the same table where I'd taught Marcus multiplication using apple slices and pennies. Now it held a different kind of lesson. Bank statements, property deeds, and 30 years of meticulous bookkeeping. Your documentation habits are a gift, Evelyn said over speakerphone, while I scanned each page. Most people don't keep records like this. I smiled, remembering George's gentle teasing about my ledger obsession. Old habits die hard, I said, running my finger down a column of neat figures. Here's the trust setup from when George passed. Everything transparent, everything proper. Evelyn's keyboard clicked in the background. Perfect. Now we need Chloe's paper trail. I've got a clerk pulling those records. By noon, the fax machine wheezed out exactly what we needed. 3 civil suits against Chloe in the past 5 years, all involving older men with substantial assets. 2 default judgments for unpaid debts. 1 restraining order that never went to hearing. Look at the pattern, Evelyn said. She finds vulnerable targets, creates chaos, then vanishes when the money dries up. My phone buzzed. Another text from Marcus. Mom, you're making this worse. Just let it go. I took a screenshot, careful to capture the timestamp and number. Below it was Chloe's message from last week. Your mother's greed is destroying everything. Screenshot, save, file. The afternoon blurred into a catalog of small humiliations. I wrote down every canceled dinner invitation, every whispered conversation that stopped when I entered Hanson's Market, every church member who crossed the street to avoid me. Names, dates, exact quotes. Around 4 o'clock, I called Martha Jensen again. She'd seemed ready yesterday, but now... I just can't, Eleanor, she whispered. You didn't see how she looked at me when I watered my roses this morning. The way she smiled, it wasn't right. My throat tightened. Martha, please. You know me. You know what's true. I'm sorry. I have to live here too. After she hung up, I stared at my careful piles of evidence. What was I doing? I was 75 years old, fighting shadows with paper. My finger hovered over the delete button on my phone, ready to erase the party plan text from Janet. The kitchen smelled like dust and tired air. I hadn't even made tea today. My hands shook as I dialed Evelyn. I can't ask people to risk themselves, I said. Maybe Charles is right. Maybe we should just elope. Eleanor, Evelyn's voice sharpened. Facts are your armor. They can't be charmed or threatened or wished away. And I've got something better than Martha Jensen. She gave me a phone number for Robert Chen, Chloe's former landlord in Hartford. He's been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. I called him immediately. His voice was firm, determined. Ms. Caldwell, I've been keeping my own records about Ms. Turner, he said. She tried the same manipulation here, targeting an elderly resident, spreading rumors about estate theft, creating divisions between family members. I documented everything. I'll have it notarized this afternoon. My hand steadied as I wrote his statement. Each word felt like a brick being laid, building a wall between Chloe's lies and my truth. I spent the evening organizing everything into labeled envelopes, financial records, lawsuits, witness statements, documented damages. Each one got a copy for my fireproof box and another for Evelyn's office. But one envelope stayed empty. Malice proof. We needed the voicemail Chloe had left the night before the wedding, the one where she'd threatened to destroy my reputation if I went through with the ceremony. I'd saved it, I was sure. But scrolling through my phone now, it was gone. The metadata would prove she planned this, Evelyn had said. Without it, we can't show premeditation. I stared at that blank envelope as the clock ticked past midnight. Somewhere in this house, on some device, that message had to exist. The question was, could I find it before the party? I was up before dawn, my third cup of chamomile gone cold beside the phone. The hold music from the carrier service had become my morning soundtrack. Tinny Mozart interrupted every 30 seconds by a robotic, "Your call is important to us." You know that feeling when you're absolutely certain something exists, but the whole world seems determined to tell you otherwise? That's where I was, call after call, representative after representative. Ma'am, deleted voicemails are only stored for— I understand your policy, I cut in, my voice steady despite the exhaustion. But this message is evidence of harassment. Please check again. The young man sighed. One moment. More Mozart. I glanced at my wedding gown, still draped across the armchair. The morning light caught the beading just so, reminding me of how George used to polish his glasses until they sparkled. Some things are worth the patience they demand. Ms. Caldwell? The rep's tone had changed. I found something in our backup server. There's a message from that number, timestamp 9:47 p.m. on the date you mentioned. Would you like me to restore it? My hands trembled as I grabbed a pen. Yes, please. 2 minutes later, my phone chimed. There it was, Chloe's voice, sharp with victory. Listen carefully, Eleanor. That wedding? It's not happening. Charles deserves better than some dried-up gold digger. We'll starve the old woman out. No friends, no respect, nothing. By next month, you'll be begging to leave town. Marcus already knows who you really are. I played it 3 times, transcribing every word. Then I forwarded the file to Evelyn with trembling fingers. Her response was immediate. Perfect. This proves premeditation. How's the script coming? Ah, the script. I'd been practicing it in front of my mirror, not the words so much as the tone. It needed to be precise, like my old bookkeeping entries. No anger, no tremor, just facts laid out like numbers in a ledger. I stood up, joints creaking, and walked to the gown. The creases from that day were still visible. Little fault lines in the fabric. I plugged in the steamer and watched the wrinkles surrender to the hot mist one by one. You're really wearing that? Charles had asked when I told him my plan. It's not about the dress, I'd explained. It's about refusing to let her rewrite what it means. Now I smoothed the fabric, checking each seam. I'd pair it with my mother's pearl studs. Nothing flashy, nothing that could be called attention-seeking. This wasn't about spectacle, it was about standing in your truth until the lies fall away. Charles and I had worked out his role carefully. He'd arrive separately, stay in the background until I gave the signal. Let them focus on me, I'd insisted. You're my ace in the hole, not my shield. The dossier took another hour to assemble. 10 pages, each one essential, the voicemail transcript, lawsuit records, debt judgments, witness statements, timeline of defamation. I made 3 copies, adding colored tabs for quick reference. No fumbling allowed when the moment came. I closed my eyes and walked through it again. Enter calmly through the main doors. Move to the center of the room. Not rushing, not hesitating. Find Marcus's eyes first. My son needed to see his mother's face when the truth emerged. Then Chloe, with the documents held out like an offering. Pause. Let the silence do its work. Then begin. The original files went into my fireproof box, locked with 2 keys. I drove 1 copy to Janet 3 streets over. She'd been the first to believe me, offering her garden shed as a backup storage space. It's all here, I told her, handing over the sealed envelope, just in case. Back home, I set 2 alarms for the party, 1 for preparation, 1 for departure. The moon was rising now, casting long shadows across my bedroom. The gown hung ready, its hem catching silver light. The voicemail played 1 more time from my phone. Starve the old woman out. I thought about ledgers then, how the numbers always balance in the end if you're patient enough to track them. 2 weeks can feel like forever when you're waiting for justice. But here I was, standing outside the Golden Oak Hotel's grand ballroom, smoothing my recovered wedding gown. You know that moment when your heart's racing, but your mind's clear as crystal? That was me. Through the doors, I could hear the tinkling of glasses and that particular kind of laughter you only get at fancy parties, the kind that's more about showing off than actual joy. For a second, I was transported back to all those charity galas I'd organized, back when George was alive. Always double-checking the books, making sure every penny was accounted for. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped in. The room was exactly what you'd expect from Chloe's taste. Crystal everywhere, white roses dripping from tall vases, waitstaff in pressed black uniforms, money screaming from every corner, though I wondered how much of it was on credit. There they were, holding court near the window. Chloe's hand was locked around Marcus's arm like she was steering a boat. My son, my careful, number-loving son who used to sort his Legos by size and color, looked smaller somehow, diminished. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying just enough to turn heads. Not too loud, not too soft. Just like balancing those ledgers, precision matters. The room didn't freeze dramatically like in the movies. Instead, the noise died in patches, little pockets of silence spreading like water spots on silk. I moved toward the center, where a high-top table stood empty, my heels, clicking steadily on the parquet floor. "I've come to correct the record," I continued, placing my sealed dossier on the table. The manila envelope made a soft thud against the polished wood. "Everything in this file speaks in a language we can all understand. Dates, signatures, and recorded words." Chloe's face tightened. She whispered something to a security guard by the wall, but I kept my focus steady. "You see, when you've spent 40 years tracking numbers and filing receipts, you learn something about patience. Each document here," I said, tapping the envelope, "has a clear origin and chain of custody, bank records, court filings, witness statements, even a particularly interesting voicemail." I saw her flinch at that last one. "All verified and notarized where applicable." Marcus tried to step forward, but Chloe's grip tightened. I could see the crescents of her nails against his sleeve. "Marcus," I said softly, meeting his eyes. "Remember when you were 7 and I caught you blaming your sister for the broken window? What did I tell you then?" He swallowed. That the truth doesn't hide forever. And that it's better to face it standing up than be crushed when it falls on you." The room had gone completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving. I turned to Chloe, who was trying to signal the security guard again. "Before I open this file, I'd like to ask you something, dear. Would you care to tell everyone about the lawsuits, the ones in Portland, or perhaps the judgment liens in Seattle?" Her face went chalk white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" I ran my finger along the envelope's seal. "That's odd, because I have certified copies of everything, including that interesting case where you tried to sue the Hendersons. What was it, 3 years ago? Another elderly couple, as I recall. The security guard was definitely moving closer now, but I stood my ground. When you've got truth on your side, it's amazing how steady you can be." "Should I start with the most recent evidence?" I asked, breaking the seal with deliberate slowness. "Or shall we go chronologically? You could have heard a pin drop in that ballroom. Every eye was fixed on my hands as I began to lift the first page. I slipped out the first document, a court filing with the state of Oregon seal clear as day at the top. Let's begin with the basics. 3 unpaid judgments in Portland, totaling just over $40,000. I laid it on the table, angling it so nearby guests could see the numbers, followed by 2 more in Seattle for another $35,000. You know that moment when you're balancing books and the numbers finally add up? That satisfying click? Well, watching recognition spread through that room felt just like that. "Now here's where it gets interesting," I continued, pulling out a stack of printed messages. "These are conversations between Chloe and various individuals over the past 5 years. All elderly, all financially comfortable. I spread them in a neat line, just like I used to arrange my receipts. Notice the pattern in her language. Just a temporary loan. I'll pay you back next month. You're like family to me." Someone near the back muttered, "Jesus Christ." A woman in an expensive blue dress took 2 steps away from Chloe. But the real insight comes from Chloe's own words. I reached for my phone, already cued to the right timestamp. This voicemail was left 3 days after the wedding incident. I should warn you, the language is rather crude. Chloe lunged forward. But Marcus caught her arm. The room leaned in as I hit play. Her voice filled the space, crystal clear and dripping with malice. "I told you this would work. That old woman's so isolated now, she'll probably beg us to let her sign everything over. All it took was one scene at the church, and now she's starving for any human contact. God, Marcus is so easy to manipulate when it comes to his mother's money." I clicked it off. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ice in the glasses seemed to stop clinking. "Moving on to the aftermath," I said, my voice steady as I extracted another folder. "These are notarized statements from 12 community members documenting exactly what Chloe told them about me, with dates and times. Notice how the timestamps align perfectly with canceled social invitations, public snubs, and sudden account closures at local businesses." Chloe's face had gone from white to gray. "You can't prove." "Would you like to dispute any of these dates?" I asked, gesturing to the timeline. "Every interaction is documented, every lie tracked, every witness ready to testify." The double doors at the back opened. 3 men in suits walked in, their expressions all business. I recognized the look, the same one my accountant wore when he spotted irregularities. "Perfect timing," I said, nodding to them. "Those gentlemen represent various creditors who've been quite interested in finding you, Chloe. My friend Evelyn made sure they received copies of your current address and evidence of undisclosed assets." A man in a charcoal suit stepped forward, process server's badge visible on his belt. I handed him his copy of the file with a small smile. "Everything's indexed for your convenience." The first demand letter appeared in his hand like magic. Chloe's eyes fixed on it, and what little color remained in her face drained away. I placed the final page on the table, my masterpiece of organization. "This is a complete index of witnesses willing to testify about your pattern of targeting elderly individuals for financial gain. 23 names, all with signed affidavits." I squared the corners of the stack, a habit from my bookkeeping days. Each one has been contacted and confirmed their willingness to appear in court. The room seemed to draw in a collective breath. I could feel the shift in the air, like watching dominoes just starting to fall. "Mom," Marcus whispered, and for the first time in weeks, he actually looked at me, really looked at me. But I kept my eyes on Chloe as I closed the folder with a soft thump. Sometimes the loudest statement is the quietest one. You know that moment when an avalanche starts? Not the dramatic crash everyone expects, but that first quiet shift of snow? That's what happened next. The 3 creditors' lawyers cornered Chloe near the curved staircase, their voices low but intense. I didn't need to hear the details. I'd spent enough years in accounting to recognize the look of someone facing financial reckoning. One of them, a sharp-featured woman in a navy suit, was reading from a tablet, words like immediate, repayment, and breach of contract floating across the space. "Could someone lower the music?" I asked, keeping my voice even. The DJ, already sensing the room's shift, faded the volume to almost nothing. In that new quiet, Chloe's rapid breathing was audible. "Is this true?" Marcus whispered beside me. His hands were shaking slightly, the same tremor I'd noticed whenever he was overwhelmed as a child. "All of it?" Chloe's head snapped toward you. Him, but for once, no smooth explanation came. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. I pulled out my phone and hit record, capturing that telling silence. Sometimes the most damning evidence is the absence of denial. I stepped back, letting the legal proceedings take their natural course. The navy-suited lawyer was now holding out a document, pointing to specific clauses with a manicured finger. "These accounts were deliberately concealed. During previous proceedings," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Around the room, I watched the ripple effect begin. A real estate developer Marcus had been courting slowly tucked his phone back into his jacket pocket and drifted toward the door. 2 women from the country club's board exchanged glances and stepped away from Chloe's orbit. A banking executive who'd been considering Marcus for a position suddenly became very interested in his cocktail. Phones started lighting up across the room, the modern equivalent of watching someone's social life dissolve in real time. I caught fragments of conversations. Have to reconsider that investment. Maybe we should pause the deal. I can't risk my reputation. The dossier sat on the table where I'd left it, its presence like a steady lighthouse beam cutting through fog. Facts don't need dramatic presentation when they're true enough to stand alone. Marcus was still staring at Chloe, his face a map of dawning comprehension. I turned to him, keeping my voice gentle. Do you remember who taught you to write thank you notes, Marcus? Who made you practice your signature until it was perfect? He swallowed hard. The memory was there. Sunday afternoons at the dining room table, me showing him how to form each letter with care and gratitude. Teaching him that his name, his word, was his bond. I let the question hang in the air between us, heavy with all the lessons about integrity that seemed to have slipped away. Around us, the room had reached its verdict. You could feel it in the way people moved, the subtle reorganization of social gravity pulling them away from Chloe. What have we done? Marcus's whisper was ragged, barely audible, but in that quiet room, with the music nearly silent and the evidence laid bare, it carried like a bell tone. I watched as another lawyer stepped forward with a new stack of papers, and Chloe's shoulders slumped just slightly, the posture of someone watching their carefully constructed world crumble, one document at a time. Charles and I left the party together, the dossier tucked securely under my arm. Neither of us spoke during the short drive home. Some victories don't need words. The street was quiet when we pulled up, just the soft glow of my porch light cutting through the darkness. The same light I'd left on thousands of evenings, but tonight it felt like a beacon guiding me back to normal. Would you like to come in? I asked Charles. He shook his head, gentle as always. Tomorrow. Tonight belongs to you. Inside, I placed the dossier in my fireproof box and double-checked the locks. Funny how such a slim folder could weigh so much, then suddenly feel light as air once its job was done. I stood at my bedroom window for a moment, watching Charles's taillights disappear around the corner. The moon hung low and bright, casting long shadows across my garden, the same view I'd stared at during those dark days after the first wedding attempt. But now it felt different, cleaner somehow. The next morning, I woke early and went through my usual routine, the one that had anchored me through 50 years of bookkeeping and widow's solitude. The kettle whistled right on schedule, and I measured out my favorite Earl Grey into the blue porcelain pot I'd had since Marcus was small. While it steeped, I went room to room, drawing back curtains to let in the autumn light. You ever notice how the simplest tasks can feel like victory laps? There I was, making tea and opening curtains like I'd done 10,000 mornings before, but each movement felt deliberate, reclaimed. I spent the next hour at my desk, making copies of everything and preparing packets for Evelyn and the other attorneys. Each document went into a fresh envelope, each envelope sealed with precise corners. Old habits die hard, I suppose, or maybe they don't need to die at all when they've served you well. The hardest envelope was Marcus's. I kept it simple. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here. Love, Mom. Then I added a P.S. The blue teapot still works fine. He'd know what I meant, how many conversations we'd had over that pot, through homework struggles and teenage heartbreaks and his father's passing. Weeks passed in that strange way time has of being both swift and slow. I watched through my front windows as the neighborhood's rhythm gradually shifted back. Mrs. Henderson from next door started waving again when she walked her terrier. The IE grocery clerk met my eyes and asked about my garden. Even my bridge group sent a tentative invitation for their Thursday afternoon game. I let it all happen at its own pace. There's a certain power in patience, especially when you've already won the important battle. The card from Marcus arrived on a Tuesday, just a simple white envelope with my name in his familiar handwriting. Inside, 3 words. I need time. I set it on my mantel next to Charles's photo and felt something settle in my chest. Not everything needs an immediate answer. When Charles and I finally set our new date, we kept it small, just the closest family, a few loyal friends, and enough flowers to honor the occasion without overdoing it. No one objected. No one whispered. The only messages I received were gentle congratulations and simple good wishes. The morning of, I opened the gown box again. The fabric that had once felt heavy with humiliation now draped differently across my bed. Proud, perhaps, or just patient. Like it had known all along we'd get here. Charles waited for me at the chapel door rather than the altar this time. When I reached him, he squeezed my hand once, our private signal that everything was just right. Above us, sunlight poured through the stained glass, painting the floor in jewel tones. Ruby, sapphire, amber. The scent of lilies drifted down the aisle, sweet and clean. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in months. Ready finally for this second chance at the second chance. Standing at the altar with Charles, my hand steady in his, I heard the pastor begin the familiar words. But this time, they carried a different weight, not the fragile hope of that first attempt, but something tempered and tested. You know what I mean? Like steel that's been through the fire and come out stronger. The morning light streamed through those towering windows, and I couldn't help but think about how differently things had turned out for Chloe. Word had reached me through Marcus's cousin that the creditors weren't letting up. 3 separate law firms were pursuing collections, and that voicemail I'd played at the party had triggered a fresh wave of civil actions. Turns out when you build your life on quicksand, it doesn't take much for everything to sink. But it wasn't just the financial reckoning that had dismantled her carefully constructed world. You should have seen how fast her social circle crumbled once that dossier hit the table. Business partners who'd been laughing at her jokes suddenly couldn't return her calls. Friends who'd nodded along to her lies found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. Even her Instagram following, and yes, I know about Instagram, I'm old, not dead, dropped by thousands overnight. The pastor's voice brought me back to the present. Eleanor and Charles have chosen to write their own vows. I looked up at Charles, and somewhere in my heart, I found room for a kind of forgiveness. Not for Chloe, exactly, but for the whole mess of it. Not that I'd be sending her Christmas cards, mind you, but I refused to let bitterness take up residence in my future. Some might call that soft, but I've learned there's steel in choosing peace. Remember those long afternoons I used to spend just sitting by my window? Back then, they felt like surrender to loneliness. Now I understood they'd been preparation, teaching me the patient strength I'd needed to weather this storm and emerge intact. Eleanor, I began, my voice clear in the hushed nave. Choose you, Charles. The words flowed easy and true, like they'd been, waiting all this time. Through the corner of my eye, I caught sight of my old friend Evelyn dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even the pastor's familiar drone seemed to lift and brighten as sunlight washed across the altar. You know that feeling when you finally set down a heavy load you've been carrying so long you almost forgot it was there? That's what it felt like, standing there making those promises. Every word laid another piece of history to rest, not just the scandal and shame of that first attempt, but the years of quiet dinners alone, of empty chairs and unshared jokes. Charles's hands were warm and sure as we exchanged rings. My new wedding band caught a bright bar of sunlight as it slipped onto my finger, sending a flash of gold dancing across the chapel wall. I watched it gleam there, this simple circle of metal that meant so much more than jewelry. It was like a quiet verdict, don't you think? A small, shining reminder that truth has a way of surfacing, that patience outlasts percussion, that dignity outlives every lie. I felt myself smile then, Not the careful smile I'd worn through the weeks of whispers and sideways glances, but something real and deep and earned. Because that's the thing about dignity. You can't fake it, and you can't steal it, and once you've truly claimed it, no one can take it away. The band caught the light again as Charles squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, both of us understanding that some victories don't need to shout. Some just quietly shine, year after year, outlasting all the noise that tried to dim them.